What has been the best corporate Darwin Award? A decision made by a company that basically killed the business. This year, POWDR, a group that ran Park City Mountain Resort, the #3 family ski resort in the country, got absorbed by Vail, its competition, and removed from ownership of its resort. Why? Because after 20 years of having the greatest lease in history, about $150,000 a year for a resort that grosses millions and millions, the end of the lease time rolled around, and they forgot to renew it. Literally, that's it. Someone didn't take down a note, and they turned their paperwork in 3 days late, got sued, and lost everything. Do your paperwork. There's a restaurant in Austin that is practically famous for its really great chicken wings. At one point, for a few years back, the wings were taken off the menu because they were too popular and slowing down the kitchen. That lasted about a month before someone realised it was a better idea to put some time and effort into improving the kitchen rather than kill off their best-selling item. Come on, guys, that's dumb. That's like McDonald's taking away the Big Mac. Like, do it properly or not at all. Do you know what I mean? Blockbuster not buying Netflix for $50 million. Netflix is now worth about $28 billion. Kodak telling the creator of digital photography to go frick himself. Sad thing is, they had the technology first in the 70s and put it off for so long because the cost would be so large for consumers. Then they just totally mistimed everything. They dug their own grave. Kodak's slogan should be, "You shoot the pictures, we shoot ourselves in the foot." If we're going with recently, Eddie Lampert, the CEO of Sears, is one of the best contenders for the Corporate Darwin Award. He's an Ayn Rand-loving free market ideologist who attempted to take his non-reality-based style of life out of the lobbyist/Congress-rigged world of hedge funds and into retail. He laid off/cut and trimmed back everything he could and forced departments, managers, and employees to fight against each other for resources and pay under the delusion that the company would benefit from a survival of the fittest atmosphere. Since that time, Sears has lost half its value in 5 years and has closed more than half of its stores. Not to mention just about destroyed one of the oldest and most trusted brands in the history of the United States. Buy MySpace for $580 million and then scare away users with ads intended to generate profit. Users leave MySpace and join Facebook. Sell MySpace for $38 million. What actually was MySpace? I never had an account, but I remember it being a thing when I was younger. Can anyone remember? If so, please let me know in the comments because I'm interested. Circuit City making the decision to no longer sell appliances. No matter how bad the economy is, people will still buy refrigerators, washers, vacuums, etc., but they will wait on TVs and video games. Selling off CarMax was pretty stupid too. And speaking of Circuit City, laying off the higher paid employees and keeping all the lower paid employees, apparently never connecting the dots on level of product knowledge, equals level of compensation. I remember going into a Circuit City just as the nosedive began, and a young man telling me outright that all the good people were let go. He wasn't being rude or apathetic, just being honest. I hope he landed on his feet. Good guy. Gerald Ratner called his own product total crap and inadvertently wiped $500 million from the company's value. He compounded this by going on to remark that some of the earnings were cheaper than an M&S prawn sandwich but probably wouldn't last as long. Dumb move, but the dude has a great sense of humour. Reminds me of the Osborne effect. The Osborne 1 was the first commercially successful PC. The founder pre-announced the successor to the Osborne 1 way before it was ready to come to market. His announcement, touting how good the next machine would be, killed demand for the Osborne 1. The company then ran out of money and couldn't bring the successor to market, declared bankruptcy, and died. What is it with all these creators bad-mouthing their own product? Like, that just defeats the whole point of being a creator. Enron, for paying their executives idea bonuses before the ideas turned a profit. They paid one guy millions for inventing an online movie downloading service about 10 years before that was feasible. Ironically, the documentary is available on Netflix. Pretty sure the executives did that on purpose. Say, I sure would like to be paid for coming up with ideas, but not actually implementing. Then why don't we? My God, that's an amazing idea. Have a bonus. Wow, I wish that was still a thing today. Netflix came really close before they wised up and shelved Quickster. What was Quickster? A few years back, Netflix announced that it was dividing its services into 2 different companies. All of the instant streaming would be handled by Netflix, while the physical DVDs would be under a new service called Quickster. It was universally hated by the internet as a whole, because back then, about 12 million users had joint streaming and DVD packages. The change basically forced them to reconfigure their Netflix subscription to streaming only, and then sign up for a Quickster account to get the DVDs. It basically required 2 accounts for users to get what they were previously getting from one account. The Quickster idea was cancelled within a month. Well, yeah, I'm not surprised. That's just an outright scam. Obviously, no one's going to agree to that. We love rice here in the Philippines. There's a popular and relatively cheap Japanese restaurant that served unlimited rice for every meal, and it was very known for it. Some brilliant guy decides to take it out. Word gets around, and people stop going there. A few months later, they decide to put the promo back, but the customers just stop coming. That would be like Olive Garden deciding that breadsticks are no longer unlimited. I would never go back. I officially nominate Schlitz beer for the Corporate Darwin Hall of Fame. #1 beer in America by far in the late 60s/early 70s, when some genius at the head office decided to change the recipe to save money on ingredients. Sales fell off a cliff. Almost immediately, they changed back to the old recipe, but it was already too late. The old Schlitz drinkers stayed away in droves. The company remains up Schlitz Creek without a paddle. Hey, I like what you did there. We actually had Schlitz as a case study in business school. Management went through 10 successive rounds of cost-cutting, incrementally decreasing product quality with each round. The last cost-cutting was the death knell. They stopped filtering out the last little yeast flakes from the final product, figuring that consumers wouldn't mind little flecks of yeast in the head of their beer. Lesson learned. Consumers typically don't notice the drop in quality going from A to B, but definitely notice the drop from A to J. Dig. That irreversible system upgrade. Never used Dig. What exactly happened? Originally, Dig was basically a news/entertainment site where the top stories were voted up by users, similar to Reddit. They changed it round so that there was a much heavier emphasis on connecting to people and organisations, so you had your own personal front page influenced by which people you followed, a bit more like Twitter. People were already annoyed by the influence of the most heavy users at the time, and the change made it way worse. It was like they took one thing about the site that annoyed people and made it the main feature. Sci-Fi Channel changing their name to Sci-Fi and replacing the good shows, i.e. Battlestar, with pooey reality TV. They're lucky they still exist at all. This won't be a top story, but one of amazing stupidity. It was the late 1990s, the middle of the tech boom in San Diego. One of the hearts of the tech boom, a small consulting company, had about 100 programmers contracted out to about a dozen companies. The profits were huge. The company charged $200 an hour per person, paid the employee about $70 an hour, pocketed the rest. The only overhead was the small main office, a recruiter, an HR person, and an accountant to handle all of that money and small expenses. Then the company scored big. Microsoft HQ in Seattle wanted some of these people, contracting about a dozen of them to start. The profits were so huge, the programmers were flown back to San Diego each weekend. The deal was still per hour, and Microsoft loved the people and asked them to work through weekends, saving the company of the cost of airfare and bringing in a couple of extra million. So 2 months later, expense reports are getting kicked back. The company was refusing to pay large parking fees for the people who worked 7 days a week for 3 and 4 weeks. The company accountant said they should have taken a cab to the airport since they were gone for 3 weeks. After reminding the accountant that they did it so at company request, they were still refused reimbursement on parking. 5 of those contractors resigned due to the parking payment issue, and others slowly followed. The Microsoft deal collapsed because they kept losing people, and within the year, the whole company folded. Yes, this company folded during the tech boom, in a boom city. Hundreds of millions of dollars lost because they wanted to screw over their most income-producing employees over maybe $2,000 in parking fees. Well, I mean, they deserve being closed down because, let's be real, if you've got people making you serious amounts of money, then you should be doing all you can for them to stay with you. So you shot yourself in the foot there, buddy old boy. Groupon isn't dead yet, but Google offered to buy them, then a 2-year-old local e-commerce setup, for $5.75 billion in the fall of 2010. Groupon didn't accept the offer, and now there are countless Google Groupon alternatives. When someone offers you $6 billion for something you just created, I say you accept it. Take the money and invent something else. Yeah, take the money and invent something else, or, just retire. Harland Clark. They print Avon catalogues, checks, Scantron forms, etc. Their business is dying because they leveraged everything on check printing. They do something like 98% of checks in the US. If you have a checkbook, I bet $10 it's a Harland Clark check. So anyway, they spun up a company called Fiddy Piddy, a $100 million investment. Super custom stationery printing. They organised call centres, set up 100-line VoIP systems in anticipation of the millions of orders they were going to get. Dozens of graphic artists recruited. No one bothered to tell them that the advertising platform they'd already blown $40 million on, 1, didn't work, and 2, targeted an audience that had very little interest in old school stationery or even one-off custom cards. Advertising platform chosen: Facebook. Total orders taken: 13. Ooh, that's a hard blow. Kmart took out a whole bunch of debt to buy back their shares, looking to raise their share price. When news of this came out, Walmart, which had basically no debt at the time, decided that it would be a good time to start a price war. Kmart had to pay off interest, whereas Walmart had little to no interest payments to make. So by lowering the profit margin to a point where Kmart had to cut back on their internal investment, Walmart surged ahead while Kmart lagged behind. The biggest cut Kmart made, I believe, was CAPEX, capital expenditures, things like making new stores and upkeeping current ones. And that's a major reason why Walmart is so popular and booming, whereas Kmart has always just seemed a little off. This will go unnoticed because it's not a huge company. However, I audited an air cargo company, and essentially a member of the legal department had shifted the T's and C's on their lease contracts. Basically, they rearranged the terms, and in the process of copy and pasting the information, they unintentionally cut the part out which pushed all the normal flying expenses back onto the client. Fuel, landing fees, all the stuff a normal air cargo contract would come with. The contract was for their biggest client, and for a while, the client signed the papers and paid as they normally have, until the client got all new management. The new management at the client reviewed all contract terms and found they no longer had to pay these expenses they previously were. So they didn't, for 2 years. When the company I audited found receivables aged greater than 2 years, they began to flip out and demand payment. The customer basically said, "I have no obligation to pay, so we're not." The company I audited went back to the agreement where they pretty much said, "Oh, frick." The receivable was not collectible, so they wrote it off, forcing them to take an enormous hit on their income statement, which in turn caused them to break a debt covenant, and all their long-term debt became current. Boom. Dead in the water, all due to a copy and paste error. Long story short, company went bankrupt because lawyers can't copy and paste. I think it's acceptable to use the saying, "You had one job." Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos coming daily.